Good afternoon, everyone. It is 5 o'clock on Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. I'd like to call to order the Administration Committee meeting. Let's go ahead with the roll call.
Supervisor Long.
Here.
Supervisor Cook.
Present.
Supervisor Ard.
Present.
Supervisor Peterson.
Here.
Supervisor Peavy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, so we have minutes from our Tuesday, February 15th meeting, and thank you to Vice Chair Ard for running that meeting. Any changes or edits on those minutes? Seeing none, the minutes will stand as published. Oh, we're ready for public comment. Do we have anyone from the public who would like to make comments? We do have Christy Smith. Go right ahead, Christy.
Good evening, a beautiful day out there today. My name is Christy Smith. I am the Executive Director at St. Croix Valley Habitat for Humanity. I wanted to talk to you briefly about affordability today. But first, I just wanted to say something to think about as we've been discussing growth here in our county. A home is a place where a job goes to sleep. So if we think about that, we're talking about the economic impact that we're seeing happening here, but where do the people go who are supporting the job growth that we appreciate here? In Wisconsin, well, let's start again. 2/3 of American counties in this country, it's cheaper to buy a home than to rent. In Wisconsin, 1 in 10 Wisconsin households spend half or more of their income on housing. One person needs to make $17.89 an hour to afford fair market rent for a 2-bedroom home in Wisconsin. And for low-income families, home equity represents 81% of their net wealth. When we think about low-income families, they're hardworking individuals who also need a place to, safe place for their families to live, to be schooled, to have access to health care and quality food. It's important to us that St. Croix County addresses the affordable housing issue as it continues to grow. And we want to help in any way that we can as an organization. We've been here for 25 years in Pearson, St. Croix County, and we're on the way up, and we're looking at the trends, and we understand where housing is and where it's going and what the needs are as we continue to get outreach from folks in our community here. So again, Christy Smith, St. Croix Valley Habitat for Humanity. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Christy. Other public comment? Anyone from the public would like to address the committee? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our first business item, which would be the financial report for February 2022.
Yeah, the financial report is in the packet. As you can see, one of these new reports that we have is the American Rescue Plan Act that the Finance Director has prepared. So these are the approved projects, and you can see we are starting to see some expenses now starting to accumulate with those projects. We're just getting going, though, on those. The rest of the financial report, the KIP projects that are all lined up for this year, and then the rest of it is financial data through February. And then the sales tax and vehicle registration fees. So February was the last collection for December transactions. So you can see where those came out. They both came out ahead of our budgeted projections. So all good, but I'd entertain any questions that you might have on the financial report.
I guess the one question I could ask, say we have 2 months worth of data, which is not a lot. So the question would be, are there any surprises or anything that was unexpected so far for the first 2.5 months?
No, there aren't any surprises. I think one of the trends, though, that we're watching very closely is interest rates. And so if you looked back at our 2020 interest earnings for the county, they were substantial, and that was the last good year we had. Then last year was well below budget. offset by increased sales tax collections, so it more than made up for it, but well below our budgeted projection. We didn't decrease the budgeted projection in 2022 for interest earnings. It's really based upon that 2020, closer to that 2020 number. So that's something that we're watching very closely. I know Leah is trying to manage that to maximize the earning potential that we have on that, but that's probably my only concern, is that we would fall short on that again.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to second item, discussion of creating a broadband subcommittee. I'm not quite sure where this came from, but I'll let you start it off, Kara.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So here are my thoughts about it. We had our strategic planning session. I think there's fairly consensus on the board that broadband is important. You know, it's one of our our priorities that we had developed. We had the broadband study. I can't remember exactly the number offhand, but it wasn't at 90-some% or so of people said, or the respondents said, the county should do something. I mean, we've done something. We approved those grants that we recently agreed on as far as a subcommittee, but I think there's more that we can do about it. And we have this large study that had a lot of recommendations, and I don't want to just see that study just be put on the shelf. Like, I think there's more that we can do about it. There's a bunch of federal money coming. We know we're going to get our second part of the ARPA funds. We know there's going to be a lot of broadband money in the infrastructure bill. I mean, it's already there. They're just working on the rules. So what I'd like to do is I'd like St. Croix County to be prepared for that money, and I'd like us to be able to thoughtfully think about, take a deeper dive into the broadband study that we had and think about how potentially are there opportunities for us to move forward? There was a lot of recommendations from that study, and so what I'm thinking, it would be valuable to have a subcommittee that maybe included some of the Chamber of Commerce, a few supervisors, some county staff, some members of the public, maybe a representative from the school districts, because we know that schools and students had a lot of impact on when they don't have broadband. I reached out to Bill and said, hey, Bill Rubin, maybe we could, maybe EDC can be involved in that. So I guess I just don't want to leave that study on the shelf, and I'd like us to have more conversation about it. So I'm picturing a subcommittee that would really kind of dive into looking at that in more depth and maybe coming up with potential recommendations to the board for future spending.
Professor Peterson.
I guess, it sounds like a progressive plan, but I'm wondering in my mind if maybe a committee is the best option. We have an administrator, we have a tech department. I just have some concerns. I did have a comment from a former board chair about the number of committees we have. So my thought is I think we want to be very cautious about appointing a committee. Maybe my thought is if the administrator feels a need for one, I have no problem with that, but just to have committees to make sure things get done. And quite honestly, that may not be the answer. So that's my thoughts.
One of the other thoughts I had, and I like the idea of getting public input too, is maybe to hold off until we get this other ARPA allocation that's coming in May or whatever, and we haven't really, it would be up to the board at that time as to how much of that we can allocate or how much we want to allocate toward broadband. And maybe that would be the right time, depending upon what that number is, to get together, not only to decide how that money should be spent, but also take a look at the providers and the grants that we approved, get a little better idea of where they're at and how those are progressing and how much progress we're making. So in other words, once we know what that other pot's going to be, let's see what progress we're making. We can take a look at this study and then try to get a little better idea of where we want to go in the future. I'm not sure a committee, I'm not convinced one way or the other. But I think that we need to make sure that we're addressing the issue. So that would be, my thoughts on it, because we can't really do much of anything until we know, well, we get that money in the bank and we decide how much of it's going to go to broadband. So I guess I'd suggest let's wait a little bit until we know those funds are coming and the board decides how much they want to allocate toward broadband. And then we can kind of get that engine going again and figure out where that would be best spent. I don't know. That's just my thoughts. Go right ahead.
Sure. I guess I would respectfully disagree because I'm not sure how the board can figure out how much it wants to allocate to broadband unless it knows what it's going to do with that money. Like, I feel like a committee that includes, and I recognize, what you're saying about we have staff, and of course we have capable staff that can do work, but I think to come up with a county-wide plan that actually addresses the needs of the stakeholders, we should have those stakeholders involved directly in the conversation. And then who I didn't include with that, of course, are some of the ISPs that are in our community. So I guess I feel like we should be planning before we get the money, so the board has information about what it could do with the money to make that decision about broadband. And also we know that there's a ton of money coming from infrastructure and infrastructure bill, and I just think that it would be better as a county if we had the conversation before the money is sitting in front of us, because part of that infrastructure bill also includes a middle mile program so that now the state gets it's going to get a lot of money from the infrastructure bill to distribute, but there's a middle mile program as well, and I know that was one recommendation from the study. Whether or not the county decides that makes sense to do, there's a bunch of money in there, and that's a direct application grant program, so I feel like it's to our benefit to have the conversation and be prepared for when those rules come out and that money comes out versus waiting until it's sitting there. And there's potentially other folks that are looking at applying for those funds.
Perhaps at this time it would be best to look at a work group rather than the formation of another committee. So the work group would contain the stakeholders you have named. It is a more relaxed environment, but would be able to look at the material and come up with recommendations that could be presented to the board at such time as this money is dispersed, including being advisory on any grants that might be available for broadband in other areas, as you suggested.
I think you make a really good point, because I remember when we did the ARPA dollars, the allocations were somewhat arbitrary when it came to broadband, because we didn't really know what it was going to cost. So I suppose if we had a little better idea of, well, if we could allocate X amount toward broadband, we could accomplish A, B, and C. And that might give the board a little more information as to what the appropriate allocation would be. So, I don't know, Ken, I'd be interested in your thoughts from an administrative standpoint, because you have been involved in working with the providers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, two things. One is timing-wise, you see I listed this as a discussion rather than an action item, and really because this is the last time you guys are going to meet as a body. This body is going to not exist anymore after a few more weeks. There'll be a new body created that replaces you, and some of you may be back on it. I know not all of you will, because Bill's stepping down. But so timing-wise, it kind of creates an issue of creating a subcommittee or a work group or whatever you want to call it. So that's one thing, is the technical aspects of forming that. But I think it's a good discussion to get out of the way and start. So the second part then is, I think to Kara's point, creating that list of things so that when we get the $7.5 million that's available, how much should we be allocating towards it? So.
Could we, I don't know what we can or can't do, it's our last meeting, but could we put some of those things into motion in terms of planning? Or at least trying to get a little better idea from our providers what those next steps might be and what it might cost, just to get a little better idea, and then possibly bring this up again after this committee is recreated in another month or so. But I'm thinking about the importance of some of this preliminary planning so that we're not just starting from scratch. I don't know.
Well, I think it's a good discussion, so I know what to prepare for the next administration committee of how we might organize it. So your discussion is developing that groundwork. So yeah, I think it will have to be on a future agenda to create it. Timing-wise, I think we're going to have the money by the time you guys meet again, because you probably won't meet again until May. But we can have that groundwork and we can have that item ready to go then to create it. And the money's not going anywhere. It doesn't have to be spent the first month that we get it. So I do know, just from talking with the ISP providers over the grants, they were not excited about that middle mile part of it. And so I think that's a great point, that we need to vet out that idea to see if it's worthwhile for St. Croix County.
Well, I guess I just add one more comment, because I know it was really clear from at least this board that broadband was clearly a priority. So I appreciate the fact that you're bringing this up, because we do need to keep it at the forefront so that the next board can hopefully also commit to expanding broadband as well. Any other thoughts on the issue? I know it's just from a discussion standpoint, but okay. So we'll move on to our next discussion item, which would be discussing the possibility of creating a housing authority. I believe Supervisor Ard would like to start us off on that.
We have been facing significant challenges in St. Croix County with housing, and the housing is not just workforce housing, which essentially addresses those persons who may be working in blue-collar or low-level white-collar positions. Our significant issue comes in persons who can only afford 30% of their total wage or their total income. And we have very, very little 30% housing, which generally is referred to as public housing authority. But creating it, as it was suggested by a public speaker at a previous meeting, a county housing authority, I don't believe this is the right path. We have housing authorities currently established within municipalities in St. Croix County. A county housing authority would require the creation of a new department, of new positions within the county, which we currently are not budgeted for. It is a great deal of work to put a housing authority together. Since we're not looking to reinvent the wheel, I would suggest moving in a direction which brings all of our housing entities together. WEDA, WESCAP, the public housing authorities, the municipalities, to have a discussion regarding the needs of St. Croix County, especially for the low-income persons, of which we are seeing more and more of. Currently on the federal fair market rent, a two-bedroom apartment is $1,329. Currently, a two-bedroom apartment, which is not subsidized in St. Croix County, is $1,650 a month. These are the realities of our economy at this time. Housing is out of reach, with a mean average of a two-bedroom home selling for $265,000. It is beyond the reach of most persons who are in need of housing. There are many barriers that also come into housing. By meeting and bringing together all of these different entities, we may be able to address this. We have statutory language in Wisconsin which protects renters from paying more than $25 for an application fee. However, when you look at application fees, most of them are $30 to $50. The reason we have this is because if you're a Wisconsin resident, CCAP is an open public record for criminal background. This is the statutory language, but when you're applying for housing, you may be applying for 6 or 8 different units, because on most units, the average application amount for persons applying starts at 30 and goes up to 100, depending on the property. It's a very competitive market. I think at this point in time, it's a given that we need 30% housing, but it's not something that will happen overnight. And there are many entities that exist that once brought to the table, I believe, can make this happen. It's something that we would be looking at in developing something like this. Even if you could get all of the funding in place, you're still looking at 2 years down the road before you actually have bricks and mortar in place. Not that it can't happen, it can. But I think our best move is to bring all of the entities together to discuss the significant needs of St. Croix County and have everyone on the same page.
Other comments? This is your discussion. I'll just throw out some ideas. I recognize that there's an housing affordability issue, certainly in the county. I know it's been a hot topic of discussion in the Economic Development Corporation, and one of the ideas that had been talked about, I would say possibly in lieu of creating a housing authority, would be to do a housing study. And that might be something that we could consider participating in from a financial standpoint, simply to create the data so that hopefully developers can respond, and we might be able to get some interest in creating some more of this, some more additional affordable housing. I'm not sure that's a good approach, but it is another option that I think is on the table. I'd be a little concerned. I share some of your concerns about creating another bureaucratic organization. And it might, if some of these organizations already exist, it does make sense to bring them together so that they would be able to work together. But I guess a study might be another possibility of something that we could consider in the future.
I think Supervisor Howard had some very good points, and an authority. I'm not sure how receptive voters would be to that either. I did do some research on some of the housing authorities. There were some counties east of us. The one thing I noticed that they seem to restrict any of their help to rural portions of the county only. So then we have to think about, I like Supervisor Howard's suggestion of maybe getting the private entities to the table to talk about maybe what some of the outcomes should be, but we're dealing with cities who maybe have different ideas of how they want to do it. So it's a complex thing, and I don't have the answer, but just some thoughts for thinking about.
Other comments for discussion? Yes, Supervisor Cook?
I guess this comment is, more directed at Supervisor Ard, because this is obviously her area of expertise. We talk about bringing the entities that already exist together. Do they get together already and have some of these conversations to try to look at it from a regional or a larger county standpoint, or is this something new?
Public housing authorities do have their own association within Wisconsin and meet regularly, not only within a regional parameter, but within the larger organization. When you're looking at WESCAP or WIDA, it is a unrelated relationship. It's similar to other organizations that provide housing. You're not working directly each day, but you are working in concert on different projects or initiatives or federal housing programs that have come through. By bringing everyone together at the table, it offers an opportunity for knowledge to be shared, for the programs that are available, the grant fundings that would be available to developers. It also puts everyone on the same page, where all of these organizations are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to provide housing that is affordable, especially to a 30% income, and that is accessible to persons. I think by bringing everyone together, we can more target what those goals should be in developing housing in St. Croix County. The other, and Dave is right, public housing is very complicated. But one area of public housing that offers hope is that even though a public housing authority is created by the municipality, it is a standalone government organization. It does have the ability, if within a given area of an authority there is no land available for further development, they do have an ability to step outside of that municipality and obtain land that is outside of that jurisdiction. So the jurisdiction lines can change for that authority. So when you're looking at rural development, many times this is what happens, is that a municipal housing authority will be the authority for a rural development. So there are many angles that can be looked at and worked with, certainly within St. Croix County and within some of our rural areas to provide this.
Other comments? Yes.
So it seems, I mean, we've talked about this quite a bit at Health and Human Services, still it's an ongoing agenda item. It seems like if we can, the county can play a role as the facilitator for this conversation, then that is valuable to, something for us to do. Like, it feels like we keep talking about it, we know it's an issue, but what can we do about it? Well, it's something, it's a step.
You know, I'll add just kind of more of a rhetorical question. I don't know that I'm convinced one way or the other, but I think as part of the discussion, it's important to ask ourselves, is it really the county's responsibility to provide low-income housing or more affordable housing? That, I'm sure, could be argued either way, but as far as what we're really accountable for to our citizens and what's our responsibility, does that fall within the confines of our responsibilities per discussion or future discussion, if you go right ahead.
I will say that given the mission statement that we have and our statement of providing services and welfare to our residents, that it could, but we are not Eau Claire County or Dane or Milwaukee. You will see county housing authorities within those counties. Within St. Croix, I don't believe, especially given our projects and the current economic situation and budgeting in St. Croix. This is not an undertaking of creating housing paid for by the county or administered. This should be an undertaking of the county stepping forth and putting together the experts in establishing housing so that we can create relationships within those organizations, with developers, with grants, with federal funding, with state funding, so that everyone is on the same page. We can be the facilitator of this type of a discussion, with possible action being taken by members of that group. I don't foresee the county creating housing at any time in the future. We're not large enough for that undertaking. And yes, we do have a significant need, but I do believe it's a need that can be fully met by organizational and private development partnering together to meet the needs.
Any other comments? Does that discussion help or hinder of what you were looking for, Ken?
Clear as mud. Yeah, I think it does focus, though, on what we're not looking for. So we're not looking at creating a housing authority. I'm not hearing that. So I'm hearing two ideas come out of it. One would be like a housing symposium, where we're pulling together the stakeholders and connecting them and trying to come up with joint solutions to some of the problems maybe. And the other one then was a housing study, creating that data field that those other entities would then be able to use to move forward. So those are the two ideas that I'm hearing come forward, and we can assign those then to the appropriate committees for further action.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Ard. That was really good information. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, we're going to move on to number 4, consideration of reclassification request to change vacant HHS supervisor to adult community support services supervisor.
Hello. We actually have a reclass and a regrade, so both number 4 and 5. And just a little history to kind of recap how we are doing these. Every time there is a vacancy, due to the recruitment and retention challenges that we face, we encourage and work with the department heads to evaluate their org structures, evaluate their positions, and look to see if there's changes that they can make that will better align with the needs of the department. And that's what's happened with these two. So number 4 is the reclass for a vacant HHS supervisor position for behavioral health. They've identified a need and the talent that they have currently to reclassify that into a different position. Should I wait to go on to number 5, or can I just cover, since they're related? Wait, okay. So that's the number 4.
Any questions for Tara? Okay, I guess we need a motion for the resolution. There is a resolution.
Not a resolution, but it's an action item by the committee.
Oh, okay.
A resolution gets forwarded to the
And
county
there-
board.
there
This
was a
one
resolution, but we
ends
still need a motion.
with your action, correct?
I would move to approve the reclassification request.
And second by Supervisor Peterson. Further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Tara.
So now I can do number 5. The Justice Support Services Department, as you know, has been growing and building itself for the last 6 months. And during that time, it's taken the director some time to evaluate the needs that she has. And those kind of have been changing and adjusting over time. And so recently, it was identified that one of the original positions that she created upon taking over the department has really morphed and is really more robust of a position. And so this is a regrade request to grade that position up from where it initially was. And the qualifications have changed to support that too.
Questions? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the reclassification? Did I say that right? regrade, sorry. Yes, okay, motion to,
Motion, I'll move.
and a second? Okay, Supervisor Ard. Further discussion, questions? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you again, Tara. Okay, let's see. We're ready to move on to our final business item, a review of the 2023 budget priorities matrix. Ken?
Yeah, this is a preview of what you're going to see in about 14 hours or so. But tomorrow at the Committee of the Whole, we're going to talk about the 2023 budget. So the department heads are going to come in and they're going to explain to you what's different that they're projecting for 2023 compared to what they have in their 2022 budget. Where are the inflation pressures, where they're increasing program expenses, and where are their staffing demands. So those are the cost pressures that they're going to share with you. So we're going to take a look at that as a global change for the organization. And then from those changes, we have to establish where is the priority for the county. So we had done this exercise last year for the first time, and I think it was a good start to this process. Now that you guys have been through it once, maybe you'll have a little bit more thought into the beginning of the process and the end result. But that's what this document is trying to show you. I'm trying to show you what you select in the beginning side and how I'm going to use that in my budget recommendation for a balanced budget that I'll present to you in the fall. So one of the things that's new this year, though, and part of the reason why I wanted to give you a preview today, is the structural deficit part of it. So last year, we didn't have a structural deficit going in. Generally, my budgets never have structural deficits going in. A couple of things outside of our control, though, have led to that. One was the union contract settlement that we had. The way it was structured created a structural deficit. So we have about a $375,000 structural deficit for that coming into the year. And then with the inflation that we have, the county board was kind enough to do a mid-year adjustment for staff, but that creates a structural deficit of about $300,000. And then some of the changes that we had with the compression, adjustments that were made at the last county board meeting also will add about another $150,000. So you add all those up and, we're a good $600,000-$700,000 worth of structural deficit. I do have a plan for that going into the 2023 budget. I think we can address that and accomplish some of the other things on the list, but that's a new item that we did not have previously. If you look at the other issues then, these are more similar to what we had last year. So employee compensation, I have as number 2 on the list, and as a comparison, it was number 2 on the list last year. And depending on if you rank it 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the list, these are the different action items then that would happen, the kind of flow charts over of where you prioritize it, what would happen. So number 2 still provides for a step increase or a COLA adjustment to the wage grid. Then we get to health insurance. I have it listed right now as a number 3 item. It was number 1 last year. So by lowering the priority, it will affect the benefit level of the employees. But we've been really good the last 2 years of not adjusting it. So I think this is the year where we do have to lower its priority so we can focus on some of the other things that are in the budget. I have on the list 4th as new positions. It was 3rd last year. So it's still far down on the list, and being this far down on the list, it's unlikely to have any new positions. My only real justifiable argument, because we're growing really fast, we have pressure demands, you're going to hear some position requests tomorrow. One of the good justifications that I have, though, is I have nowhere to put new staff anyways. So if you give me new staff in 2023, I don't have office space for them. So we're already cannibalizing the county board chair's office. We've cannibalized conference rooms to put staff into. So we're already at that point where we're doing that. If we delayed this for a year and said, really we're going to look at this from a 2-year perspective, in 2024, positions are going to move to the top of the list. We're going to take these other things in 23, but 24, we're going to move that up. That's when the first half of the government center project would be done, and we would have more office space. So it makes maybe more sense to delay that to that second year. And then fifth is operating expenses. And while you can rate this at the lowest point, the operating expenses that are contractually obligated or inflationary pressures, you're going to have anyways. I mean, I can put it at the bottom of the list, but if a pencil costs $1.50 when it costs $1.20 the year before, we're paying the $1.50. You really don't have any choice in that. So we don't necessarily increase the operating expenses, though, for the departments. What we do is we make them prioritize their purchases and stay within those operating ranges. But anyways, that's the decision matrix and how it's going to be used both tomorrow at the end of the discussion and then moving forward. Really, the May County Board is when we need to establish what these priorities are. I know that this committee is going to be reconstituted on April 19th when the new county board chair is elected. The county board chair will select those standing committee members. I'm hopeful that we can actually call an admin meeting before the end of April, get a recommendation, and have that on the May County Board to establish these priorities. So that's kind of the timeline goal that I have for the county to work through this. So anyways, questions on the decision matrix or the budget priorities that we have?
Yeah, so we'll be looking at, or the new admin committee will be looking at the priorities, and of course the board will. I'm just wondering if you have any conversations with staff about the priorities. Like, are there, if we're looking at, let's say, well, the structural deficit, we obviously have to take care of. I mean, that we have to do something with that. But so if our staff ever asked a scenario, I say, okay, well, there's compensation, health insurance, new positions. Like, are there trade-offs here that would make sense for you? Like, maybe I'll take less increase in compensation if I could just get some help in this department. Like, it help that I need a new staff person so bad that it's making it worse than getting another 0.5% increase in compensation. I'm just wondering if those conversations happen at all.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about these issues both at department head. We talk about these types of issues at our staff advisory, which is not all department head level. And so these are topics that we do talk about within the county with at least select groups of employees. And then we use other data points, I think. So like exit interviews. So in our exit interviews, nobody is saying they're leaving the county because of the benefits. That's not a reason to leave the county. So the benefits are really good. They're leaving the county because of compensation. So compensation's low. But to bring compensation up, I have to offset something else. And so that's, I think, the balancing act of determining the give and take on the different areas. And so your specific question, though, about a department saying we would forego compensation increases for additional help, I think it depend on where you're asking, whether you're asking at the department head level or the staff level. The department head would probably say yes, and the staff generally probably would say no, would be my gut reaction. I don't know if you'd concur with that. Yeah. So it does vary, but we do have conversations with staff and department heads about these issues. Ultimately, though, it's your decision, so.
Are will the department heads be hopefully forthcoming tomorrow in terms of what their really needs are that might help us to fit into this matrix a little better, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to explain where they see the pressures in their department, and some of them won't have any. I think Tara said that in HR, she doesn't see any additional staff or any inflationary pressures with the HR expenses that she has. So we're going to, move on to the next department when we get to that. So not every department is seeing those issues, but I think the departments that do share their particular challenges are going to be honest about what they're seeing. And it's going to be a lot to consume. I mean, I anticipate it's going to be an hour to 2 hours of the department heads telling you what their issues are. And it's going to be hard to determine, is the medical examiner's need bigger than the clerk of court's needs? I mean, they have different types of needs. They're competing interests, though. I mean, who is more important then? That's a really tough decision to make. But I think what you can do as the county board is you can hear where the issues are and help establish the priorities, and then based upon the priorities, I'll delve into the individual departments and pick where that higher priority is.
Other questions, comments? Supervisor Peavy?
Yeah, I just, following up on Ken's comment, I don't know how Robbie's ever going to budget even with the amount of oil he uses and the price of oil. I mean, that one's just going to be, I know the bids are coming in, but they're not even firm bids the last time I talked to him. So you're going to see a huge demand there for more resources just to do what he's done in the past. So I'm sure that's one of the departments that'll really get hit by the inflation part of the oil. So.
Well, oil's down 27% off its peak. It closed under $100 a barrel today for the first time, now for a couple of weeks. So hopefully those prices will come down. So it's probably good that we didn't lock in 2 weeks ago. But yes, highway is a great example of where those inflationary pressures, there's just no way for us to keep up with that. And for Robbie, we do have an outlet for that, and that's with the vehicle registration. At some point, the county's going to have to take a look at what we charge on that vehicle registration. We only charge $10 per vehicle, but a lot of the competing counties that do charge one are at $20 or more. And so we have capacity there when we get to it. Robbie and I talk about it, and I don't want to go there until we have to go there. But that is one of the options that we have for highway.
Other comments, questions? Well, it should be an interesting discussion tomorrow, for sure. Thank you. So I don't know if we, this was really a discussion item. It was really more for our education, more so than yours. Okay. Okay, well, I guess request for future agenda items is kind of a non-issue. Announcements, correspondence. I guess this is my opportunity at least to thank everyone for being part of this committee. I've really enjoyed working with you all and all your staff. I'm very privileged and honored to be chair, and I hope I reasonably met your expectations. But for those of you attempting to stay on the county board, I wish you luck in the elections and hope to see you next month. And a special thank you for Supervisor Peavy for all that you've done, not only this committee, but all the years of service that you put in. All of our citizens are much better off as a result. So thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Yes, Ken.
Just one thing then, you actually will get a chance to meet again because there'll be a special admin committee meeting on April 4th at 4:30 p.m. So if you want to pencil that in, that's for the bond sales. And so we're going to have a special county board meeting on 4/4 at 5 p.m. So special admin will recommend the sale resolution. The bond sales, actually, the bids are due that day. And so I won't have the information until that day for you. But by the time we come to meet, we'll have the list of bids and the resolution for you to take action on and recommend to the special county board.
Thank you for that clarification. So we'll get to meet again. Yes, Supervisor Peterson.
I'd like to echo your thoughts, or thanks to everybody on this committee also. And your performance, by the way, only reflects my brilliance in selecting committee members. So thank you.
Okay, any other parting comments, announcements? Then we will adjourn at 5:49. Thank you again, and go enjoy the rest of the day. We'll see you on April 4th. Or no, we'll see you tomorrow morning.